Hello, everybody. How are you this lovely Thursday? We're all good here. For reference, this is episode, and Sandy, here you go. I got a new way of doing it. So it's like 5,
Okay.
10, 14, episode 14 of Remotely Interesting. So I hate it when I go to 50. I'm going to go bop, 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 and go up 50. Let's do it that way. And we are going to be talking about asynchronous design sprints in the Manhattan Sprint project. This is what would you call it? I wouldn't say a discovery, but a new invention, a new way of doing things that both Lee Duncan and Matt Pupa have kind of brought to fore. They're coming on to talk about this. I've been actually waiting all week for this conversation because it's like, oh, I want to know what you guys are up to and what's going on. So with me also was Sandy Lamb, who, if she is the two-time most valuable practitioner of the GVDS. She's a service designer of software AG. For really quick reference, Lee Duncan is from IBM. He is the, what'd you say, enterprise, your official title is enterprise, you're gonna have to tell me. I've seen it so many times on your profile.
Enterprise Design Sprint Leader.
There you go. Leader was the only thing I left out of there. So I had enterprise beside sprint.
I'm also easily led. Yeah.
Especially on bike trails, you find those hanging tires everywhere. It's like Blair Witch Project-ish kind of, but we won't get into that.
That's true. We won't get into that.
And Matt, why don't you go ahead and, since I butchered Lee's introduction, why don't you go ahead and let everyone know what you're all about?
No worries. Yeah, I did analytics for 10 years, and right now I'm in New York. I left my last job, sold my place in Boston, moved to New York. So I don't know what I am right now.
You're on the run is what you're saying.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, I'm going to end up in another country, I'm sure, because of New York's still a disaster, but it's getting better, but we'll see.
Yes.
Anyway, yeah, I'm trying to figure out exactly, am I a designer, service designer, business designer, product manager, project manager? I don't know. That's part of what I'm trying to figure out right now. But
you could call yourself an asynchronous design sprinter. Not many people do that right now. Could be a nice niche for you.
You're shaped
definitely one aspect of it for sure.
Yes. Okay, so let's get into this. I think where I want to start with the conversation, and Sandy, of course, as always, you feel free to chime in anytime you like, because it's not just me being a talking head. You're basically a co-host of this, so please, ask your questions and leave the conversation as you like. But I do want to start with kind of introducing you both and how you came around to this notion of asynchronous design sprints in the Manhattan Sprint project. I know that it derived from conversations that happened in the GVDS forum, probably even before that. But I'd like to get both of you to kind of give some narrative, tell a story about how this originated and kind of how it came to be.
Matt, go for it.
Yep, sure. So I'll start. So I've been doing design sprints probably for about 5 years off and on, right, occasionally, and got introduced to the GVDS for GVDS 3 last year and really like the concept of it, really like doing them. But another thing that I really like is the idea of working asynchronously and remotely. So doing a lot of deep focused work on your own time and being able to work with people who aren't necessarily working at the same time you are or with you, but over the course of a day, right? Like things flow like they usually would and things get done. And so I just was very curious about the idea of combining those two and experimenting with it, because design sprints seem to require so much time together. And I was watching some of the kickoff sessions of other teams, and I saw, I forget what team, but it was the one that Lee was in. And he just quickly mentioned something about experimenting with the rate and pace of work online, offline, together, not together. So I had worked with Lee in GVDS 3. So I reached out to him and said, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. What have you done before? And do you want to team up and do some experiment around this?
Okay. Yes, I would agree with that. And myself, I'm in a lot of meetings, and I see when I'm in those meetings, there's a lot of waiting. That can happen in workshops. It can happen in regular meetings. We're all waiting to hear something, waiting for insights, listening, doing the deep listening, spending time waiting to say something. It's usual for a number of people to be talking at the same time, and ultimately waiting for the moment to do something. So we're always kind of in this standby mode. And as a person that kind of like to think about how we can do things better, how we can look past defaults, how I was contemplating around the same time that Matt was apparently, how can we optimize that time to be more productive and convert the waiting to the doing? That was my goal.
So how does, and this is a comment that I saw in chat, how does asynchronous kind of work with design sprints in this regard? So how are you taking the design sprint process and making it asynchronous?
Yeah, it was really just, I mean, it's a very, Lee and I were talking earlier, and this whole thing was really like, we kind of launched a very simple plane and tried to build the rest of it while we were, in flight. So we really just started to break down some of the exercises that you would do during a design sprint and just going through them and saying, okay, is it possible for us to take elements of this and instead of doing it online together, can it be something that's done offline on your own? And we ended up with a very, I would say, kind of skeleton process, right? It was 3 days. I think some of the exercises were very simplified. So I think there's still open questions of things that you would typically see in a design sprint that we still need to solve for, but there were simple things like generating how might we questions, coming up with lightning demos or solution sketches, doing those, and then just posting them somewhere for everyone else to see.
And by posting, you mean creating Loom videos, things that basically would explain your point of view and kind of go through the work that you've been doing so that other people can consume it on their own time.
Right. So as a replacement of maybe posting those things to a mural board and then as a group going through them individually, we just used Loom, which is one technology. You, excuse me, create a sketch or a demo, put it on your screen, you record a accompanying video that kind of walks through it, explains it. So it kind of replaces that and you're able to do it on your own time. And people can watch those and absorb them on their own time.
Right.
So is the idea that they, go ahead, Lee.
I was going to say, and something that I heard there was really interesting, is we can use technology to accelerate the process. So instead of just having to wait to hear everything at a speed of, 1, you can play it on 2 to 3x. You can use technology for dictation. There's numerous things that can accelerate that process where you can cheat time and be more effective and also save energy. So you're always looking for the insights as opposed to just trying to survive a period of time and hoping that you will be alert enough to recognize the signals. So anyway, focusing on really content-rich information, using technology and allowing it to elevate the insights, I think is useful.
Now, is there more? Oh, go ahead, Sandy, go for it.
I especially saw that when we were doing you were optimizing the different time zones. You actually had a video explaining how you try to set up when it's supposed to finish the deadline or when it's supposed to finish the voting, when are we supposed to finish all the solution sketches. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that and tell us a bit more how you actually come up with those deadlines and optimizing those time zones.
Yeah, that was probably, as far as putting this together, that was the toughest part of it. And honestly, I probably overthought it a little bit because the simple answer would be to, okay, clearly everyone is on different time zones, but there's for example, noon in New York is 6 in Central Europe, right? So if you standardized everything to noon in New York, just say, okay, no matter what your time zone is, like noon in New York, that's when a deadline is due. But you run into the cases where, for example, Ming, who was on my team, he's exactly 12 hours ahead. So if you make a deadline at noon in New York, it's midnight for him. And so he may not be working at that point, which is totally understandable. So really what I try to do is just kind of work through, okay, what makes the most sense that gives people the most opportunity to do the work in a 24-hour period, but also be able to consume their teammates' work and then take the appropriate actions they need to take the appropriate actions they need to based on that. So it's, for example, the first day was the how might we votes, or generating a how might we question and then doing the votes on it. So I just needed to try to think through every time zone for the team. what's an appropriate deadline that will allow everyone to come up with the how might we question, and then how much more time is needed for that day to have time to look through the other how might we questions and then vote on it. So I know that's a very long-winded answer, but really it's very complicated. It's very nuanced. You need to look by team, what are the different time zones, and just try to figure out like what works, what doesn't.
Yeah, and but something I would add there is just like in good design isn't always what is added, it's what's taken away. So probably part of the real skill here is what can we take away? What is not essential for doing it in an async element? And then figuring out what parts need to exist, what time of the day they need to exist. Let's start thinking about digital wellness. People in certain geographies are not going to work well at 11 o'clock at night. They may have better digital wellness between 9 and 11 a.m. So for example, if we could index and get a sense of what's the total collective digital wellness and how can we time that, that would improve things. Think how well you do when you're well rested and in a good mood. We're talking magnitudes of improvement in work. So that may be something we're going to look at. And also being able to self-select when you're going to work and when you feel like working and feeling you have agency over when you're going to do the work. That is a multiplier in the quality of your work, your ability of your brain to function well. Thinking and coming up with ideas requires a lot of metabolic function of the brain. The brain is an energy hog. So if you go in there, you're driving your car, it doesn't matter if you have a Ferrari. If you've only got half a gallon on the tank, you're toast. So anyway, that's the goal.
Could you do something where it's kind of a hybrid of two different kind of spectrums, where like in a design sprint, sometimes you find that if a team gets all their activities done early, they tend to move a bit faster. Whereas other people who require a lot of time to get things done usually need that impetus of a deadline or a line in the sand to basically say that everyone kind of needs to get everything done by this time to move forward to, like, say, Wednesday or to Thursday.
I have to say something on this one because it's exciting to me. I've wanted for a long time to be able to refer to Parkinson's law for a while. So Parkinson's law, of course, is the work expands to meet and fit the time allotted to it. That's exactly what happens with design sprints is, look, we've got to be in this meeting for 2 hours. Let's slow things down because we have to spread it out. Or you kind of psychologically pace your work. Now, things change dramatically if we have a false, artificial sense of urgency, and we say, yeah, we thought you had 4 hours, now you have 15 minutes. You start thinking very carefully about what are the most essential functions that need to be complete. So what if we were on that emergency consciousness all the time? We did in a way not to beat them up, but we really thought about how can we optimize time and not optimize the waiting. Those were some of the questions we had for ourselves.
What I was thinking also, and to kind of add to that, is let's say you have a team that has the disposition that all of them move fairly fast. Like they just know they can make decisions fast. They don't need a lot of discussion. And then there's a requirement that if, like, say for a design sprint, if everyone contributes their point of view on making a map or putting in their solution sketch, when you get everyone who turns in their thing, say if it's in advance of like an arbitrary deadline, then that triggers for the facilitator the next step in the process, so that like to your point, you don't have to necessarily wait for a certain amount of time to pass. Contrary to that, you could have a group of people that really like to make videos, discuss and chat, get points of view, synthesize their thinking. So they naturally want that extended time to do deep work, to have the time to do it. And sometimes you'll have a mix on one team. But I think the idea is that with asynchronous, if everyone is pretty much set and they turn their work by a certain time, even if it's early, then you can basically, the facilitator can go, okay, we hit this milestone, or we hit this gate. Now we can move on to this thing. Whereas if people need a lot of time and will work right up to the X hour to get it done, you still have that line in the sand that people can do. I guess it just depends on the nature of the team. But what are your thoughts?
So for me, I mean, that definitely was part of what we were intending to do first. Like we were thinking about automation tools and no code tools potentially that could use those things, like, okay, let's wait until everyone does an activity, which triggers the next thing, like you said. And then versus the discussion, I don't know, and Lee, please add to this. Maybe there's like an AI component that needs to be a little bit smarter to recognize the differences between how teams potentially operate and can, I guess, guide the pace of the sprint. So I think try to look it up or try to research a little bit, but yeah, that's definitely a big thing we need to do going forward.
Yeah,
you
so I think
actually
go ahead.
I just want to say, like, you guys actually already use some kind of automation tool, which was the automatic reminder on Slack, right? Because I was actually part of the team, so I actually constantly got those messages saying, oh, like, you have 2 more hours to finish your homework, or you need to put your votes in, or something like that. So in a sense, we already had that in place.
The goal was for it to appear automated, when in reality it was just me in the background, like typing furiously, making sure those automations went out. But yeah, like that was the goal, and I wish there were more. But I think, again, we did this right on the back of 3 weeks of the GVDS, so really it was a lot of Scotch tape and Band-Aid trying to stitch it together.
Yeah. So we want to be early adopters of our own innovation. That's actually a quote from Robbie Allen. And I think having dynamic sprints as opposed to, well, this is a 5-day sprint. Everybody, we're doing a 5-day sprint. That type of announced, hardened term seems to me screams that there is some inefficiency, right? How do you know it's 5 days? Why would every sprint be exactly 5 days? So I think having a dynamic element is important. We're also thinking about coming up with some definition of a sprint mindset. And what I mean there is, could we do a Myers-Briggs personality test on individuals so we can engineer a group based on their psychological profile? Could we bring together a team, a sprint team? You know, usually we think about a few roles, and with one kind of catch-all, which is SME. For the stuff we're working on, we want to make sure we have a person in the sprint team that that may specialize in AI, that may specialize in robotics and automation, that may come from CIO so they can help us with the tech stack. How can we figure out this async autonomous sprint stack? Things like that, being very deliberate about who we have in there, being very deliberate in the mindsets, highly adaptable individuals, I think is something we really should take a look at.
I'm a big fan of core clarity, and I use that at my previous full-time job. That takes from StrengthsFinder, from Clifton Strengths, and I got amazing results from it. In that I understood how people natively work together, but I didn't use it as dogma or gospel. I used it as kind of like a data point to consider, like how people would work together and how they would kind of view the work and get along. So, but it did help me optimize teams. How that would translate in the online environment is another conversation altogether. But there's that dimension of getting people in the same space and having them work on something which makes for interesting conversation. I do want to ask a follow-up. Go ahead.
I was going to say one other thing is, if someone wants to write a book, The Art of Nudging, that would be a terrific book. You know, how can you optimize nudging? What are some of the tools you can use? What are some of the techniques? How do people respond? I think that's huge. And then something else we're thinking about is, how can we model some of the social pressures, interactions within a digital environment, right? How can we make the work we're doing more transparent and visible? So we're thinking through design sprint heuristics, a heuristic dashboard. So, Lee is only 25% done and everyone else is 80% done. So then maybe we could swap the role of the facilitator then into kind of this hybrid role where maybe they're also involved with, now they have some additional time, they're taking a look at blockers where that one individual is not progressing. And so we can also be kind of open source on the process and possibly also integrate other processes in there, such as Agile and Lean.
What I'm curious about is who's the audience for this? You have an asynchronous design sprint experiment going on that you're working through, and you have some really talented virtual design sprinters as part of this. But if you're going to be taking this out of the context of people that live and breathe this stuff, who do you see as the proper audience?
Lee?
Okay, so I see this isn't for an audience of individuals within a GIE, a globally integrated enterprise, for example, like me, where the time zones just inflict too much damage. You just can't be effective. It's painful, it's difficult, and certainly you can't have a consistent process of working with those individuals. And I think it's in fast moving digital spaces where you're prototyping digital elements as opposed to physical elements. I think those are some things, but I think it's fast moving. I think it's technology. I think it's within globally integrated environments. Those are the individuals I think that would benefit most.
Matt, what are your thoughts?
I really echo a lot of what Lee said. I mean, I think the fact that people are just working all over the world now, like the whole explosion of remote, I think it's pretty open, to be honest, and who can use this type of stuff.
Sandy, what do you think? Who do you think the audience is for this?
I don't know exactly, but I think because to me, it's not really just the audience, it also has to fit the personality. A lot of it is like self-discipline. So it's not like you can say, oh, it fits to the enterprise environments that everyone can actually do this. It has to come with like who in this environment can actually do this. That's how I felt when I was doing the sprint myself. Like I constantly have to remind myself, okay, nobody's going to go behind me. There's no online time. There's nothing that it will like triggers me to actually do the work. I have to be responsible for myself to finish something. And I think that kind of mentality is not for every person. Even you work in the same company, even if you work in the same sector, it doesn't, it's not suitable for every single person. That's how I felt. So right. I don't know, perhaps. So perhaps like before we actually get those done, we have to do like kind of like a personality test or something like that. I have no idea, but yeah.
Right. It may be definitely specific. And then something that's interesting to me also is, I think you really have to think through for async, doing things differently. Just like you can't take what happens in real life and drop it into a Zoom call. There's different nuances. I think you have to think about attention pros. How are you writing for attention? Just when they're not there and you can't force them to read it. How can you do it in a way? How is it long enough? What words? And the video, how long should it be? Who should be talking? When? How do you couple that together? What do you decouple? What do you do each day? Can it be broken out too much? If it's a bunch of noise, when does information become noise? Discerning all that out, how can you make it simple, clear, just enough direction that day to execute, visual, just enough types of metrics, so everyone on the team knows where you are and knows what's open, and you're able to address if there's a blocker. There's a lot there.
If I can make a pitch for this, I think here's what's running through my head. What kind of audience is time deprived and has that geographical boundary of not being able to connect with other people, where they're in remote virtual seems to make more sense, especially now during a pandemic time where travel is restricted. They're not as mobile as they used to be. And I think leaders, executives, people in the C-suites, people that are basically where their schedule is dictated by somebody else. They have absolutely zero time to basically put to something that for the most part may leap them forward in terms of strategy by months or even years by using a hybrid of the design sprint process, but they just don't have the time. If you think about it, the nature of what you're doing with asynchronous design sprints, you're basically saying you don't need to be in the room. You just basically have to give your point of view and your perspective on something related to an effort. So you can record it in Loom, you can record it on something else. You can basically make it part of an ongoing conversation with a bunch of other group leaders. Politics can be involved with it, but essentially you follow the same dynamic where you have a timeline that you have to adhere to. You have to bring in your point of view on certain things. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a traditional 5-day design sprint or whatever. There's plenty of models to showcase how strategy sprints work, how like roadmap sprints have been popular in some circles. You could essentially take those models and project them out and with this kind of communication hybrid, where really what you're telling somebody who has worked 60, 70 hours a week is take 10 or 15 minutes or a half an hour to look over what's been done and fire up Loom Pro, record what you're thinking about, bring in some data, and as long as they know what the objective is for that particular gate, they can contribute in a time that makes sense for them on their schedule. Then you just have the facilitator or somebody that's harnessing all the different points of view to synthesize it and a top level view for them to understand, so that when it comes to actually applying it to an artifact that's going to lead the group forward, that's potentially a thing that can be done and you just have to extend the timeline out a bit so that everyone has the ability to contribute. At least that's what's been going through my head when I've been hearing how it's been described, and the kind of audiences that I've been servicing through my own business. This seems like it's a perfect place to kind of experiment.
Yeah, so really interesting what you said there. And I think there's kind of this new role of a design sprint engineer. How are you engineering? How are you designing sprints? I think that's huge. And then also, as you said, the facilitator may take on a different role, which is being the person kind of trafficking the work a little bit more and observing where the progress is happening and making sure certain tasks are taken with the right people to kind of optimize in the moment, to be that centerpiece that that way of trafficking work and optimizing the resources.
Because Sylvian has a follow question that kind of is in the same space, and he asks, do you think it's possible to keep engagement and work quality in an asynchronous sprint? And I know I'm projecting it out in terms of like the C-suite, but I think he meant for just in general. And he also asks, how do you manage that? Is this only for people who are experts, or can it be for other people?
So I think just building off a little bit about what Sandy said with the personalities, I mean, I definitely think there's an element of that, understanding who naturally is maybe more fit for this than others, but that doesn't mean people that aren't naturally fit can't do it. It's just up to, again, maybe the design sprint engineer to figure out the best way to get everyone involved and everyone engaged, and that may require different elements and different pieces for different people.
Perhaps
yeah, that's just, my whole. Go ahead.
Perhaps it's just also like a mindset change. You know, like before we even have all this technology, we communicate between each other in a different way. So, but then as the world changes, we also learn and then evolve, and then could be it's just a matter of learning and shifting that mindset altogether.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, it's interesting too, like some of this seems, I guess, very forward thinking, but I also think about some things like Neuralink with Elon Musk, right? Like if that technology was to come in the next 20 years, I know this is very far out there, but I mean, that's literally, I think, combining an element of some computer or thing that basically gets intertwined with your brain. So we are literally changing our human makeup. So when you think about that extreme, getting people to work maybe more autonomous in this way doesn't seem like it's that out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, on demand. I was going to say innovation on demand, I think, is something we should be thinking through. And then also, there's been a lot of good progress in virtual reality with companies like Facebook and Samsung, et cetera. And they really have it pretty well worked out in regards to gaming, but there wasn't such a substantial need to shift it over into the business realm. I think that is changing very quickly, right? I'm sure the roadmap they had is being accelerated dramatically, and something we're thinking about to kind of continue to push ourselves on how do we make this a true Manhattan project where we're trying things that have never been done before. Because if 10% of the things we try work out, it'll lead to step change improvement. What we're thinking about is taking a look at virtual reality, some of the technology from Facebook, Samsung, et cetera, and see if some of the ceremonies and events that we do in Design Sprint, where you need that engagement, that swift trust, et cetera, right? You need to be there in person. The goal is actually not so much the tactical execution. It's about understanding who we are and what we want and getting a lot of signals. So something we're going to take a look at in the postseason is what type of technology is available, what would be productive and useful to bring in, and then maybe try it out in some of the ceremonies where we're teaming up, and also think about some of the apps that integrate into that, where maybe in the future we could do some ideation things in using VR. And then we also anticipate we want to do some exploration in maybe doing some prototyping using augmented reality. That would be interesting.
That's where I was going to go with that.
Yep, and then prototyping some other things such as prototyping APIs, et cetera, and making use of 3D printing, et cetera. So I think those are all areas we can experiment with.
Because one of the things you're talking about with experiences is that most of us are translating prototypes to design interfaces, like digital design interfaces of devices that we're using. But what the one component could be is that if you're working for Hilton, you're working for hotels, or you're working for hospitality, and you're trying to construct a new kind of engagement model for people in like a new hotel or a new place they're going to be, VR makes sense from the perspective of if all the discussion has been around what it's going to be like, VR, even if it's like Spartan, can still give you an idea of the concept of the layout, where things are, where you want to be engaged, all of that. But that's where the concept of even a prototype or a prototype will kind of put it into like another dimension altogether once that gets to the point where people understand what they can ask for and what we can deliver on that front.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and one of the things that we kind of wanted to experiment with, and me personally, I feel like, and I've heard from some people, it seems like when you do a design sprint, it almost is natural for the prototype to fall back into a digital product. And so I knew for me, and I think Lee agreed, like I knew I wanted to push something that veered away from digital. So when we came up with the idea of thinking about redesigning physical space in a world with COVID and even after it, right? I think something like that is, and the feedback on that was really good. People really enjoyed that idea. So I think, having that feedback is good when thinking about going forward, prototyping stuff that may be more VR, AR, and isn't necessarily just a digital interface.
Yeah, if it's consensus building, I could see AR, VR being the possibility. If you're talking about asynchronous design sprints, and then when you get past your solution sketching, you're actually executing, if it's market driven, meaning you're trying to test it in the market, every single person on the team can learn how to do prototyping in a way that makes sense for them and test out something in the market based on the help with others to see about the desirability of something that they're building. And you don't have to have consensus on one thing to do it. If the experiment that we did 2 weeks ago with 15 people is any indication, you just need a healthy group of people that can contribute and bring something that's believable to the market, and then see how it reacts, so that you don't necessarily need to ride with one single truth that comes out of the session. You can actually go with variations on a theme. So there's that notion that asynchronous would also allow for, multiple paths you can go to if you're market driven to see what people react to, and then just adjust based on the data that comes in. So there's that appeal too, if you want to kind of combine what you're doing with this Manhattan Sprint project and kind of marrying prototyping in the same sense to see where things go.
Yep, and I think also that was very good. I like that. I think also it addresses a lot of queuing theory issues where things get blocked by certain things, like one thing is not done or this person's not done. So I think that trafficking component is very interesting. Also, an area where we need to really investigate is using technology that does some of the more labor-intensive tasks, such as the research up front. What types of tools are available that will provide us insights or can capture it? They can digitize it and capture it and do that. The testing. How can we automate the testing components? There are moments, there are places where we want to be there in the wild and having conversations with them and observing them, but there may be some things where we could automate that process. And usually, one of the biggest factors in being able to innovate quickly is to be able to move quickly and get enough collective reactions from the market to get a signal. And the more you can put things out into the market, and the more we can automate things, will allow us to get the ultimate feedback, which is the market will speak and tell us whether or not our idea is good or not.
Yeah, because VPs that are basically looking for validation to send to the board will have that rationale if they can have the data to kind of work with. And then it becomes a different conversation around who actually has the better idea and where they can go with things. Oliver and Lardy actually made a comment about fully asynchronous design sprints could be very nice for C-level to consult multilingual teams and experts, which I agree with. It could also give time to accelerate the process with goals and decisions from the sponsor. Matt and Lee, do you have any response to that comment?
I think the multilingual one is interesting, yeah, because I mean, even though this is an international community, pretty much everyone is able to speak English. So it is an interesting thing to think about if you have teammates who potentially do speak different languages and there is a language barrier there. So I think that's something for us to think about going forward.
And so I'm going to yes and on that. So I think also asynchronous design sprints are more inclusive. Some people learn better from visualizing things. Some people need to hear it. Some people need to take their time reading it. Some people need to do whatever. We all have different ways of processing information and different ways of thinking and different ways our thoughts get interrupted. So what if we could control and optimize that? And we would have the agency to do our work when we want to do and the pace we want to do it, and looking and reflecting at the right artifacts that appeal to us. I think that an asynchronous approach affords us that option.
So for those that will say, well, how about actual discussion? There has to be some sort of human component to this where it just can't be completely disconnected from everyone else, because then you become this kind of, I'm putting the devil's advocate hat on for a second. That basically all you're doing is you're becoming a glorified message board that basically has like video and other things to it. What about actually connecting as humans around what we're trying to do? And isn't that fundamental to a design sprint process?
So that's probably the biggest feedback that we got, was people didn't necessarily feel as connected as they did in the normal GVDS. And I think part of that was kind of by design, right? In a typical design sprint, the facilitator can very heavily guide the communication and the team building. We kind of wanted to test the opposite end of the spectrum, and first of all, see what people would do. Would people kind of facilitate that themselves? And some people did. I think there was some really good team building exercises in there, but I definitely think we realized that however it's done, that's something for us to improve on and kind of provide. So I don't know if I have the best answer for that right now, but I think at least going forward for the next one, there will be more of an emphasis at the beginning, maybe during discovery, to have one, maybe a few meetings where we are meeting over Zoom or in person or whatever. And then what are the other kind of small opportunities to increase that connectivity? So I met with Hugo, who was on my team yesterday, and he had a really good idea. And we were using the mural boards and people were going in and doing exercises, but everyone was anonymous. And if you took out that and took out the fact that everyone was anonymous, I'm not going to try to say the word right now, but you realize who else on your team is doing work at the same time. So maybe it's an opportunity to maybe send them like a quick voice message or a quick Loom to get those quick engagement hits and feel a little bit more connected.
It actually happened to me one time. Yeah, I was actually putting in my solution sketch and I was having trouble with it. And then I saw another team member on the mural at the same time, and then we start chatting there. Instead of just like writing messages, we also use like icons and images and stuff. So it was quite fun actually. So that way it gave me a little bit extra opportunity to actually connect with the team member as well. So.
Yeah, I don't think we use second screen and texting enough in a deliberate way. We can use that a little bit more. And as far as extracting the humanity out of design sprints by using it, I'm sure that, I think that's a really good perspective. But one other option is instead of having a number of these mediocre events, you could shift them from mediocre to magnificent. Figure out what moments you can connect the best, maybe even engineer those moments to be even more engaging and more sharing and more human and more open, and take your time and elevate those special moments as opposed to just kind of flooding people with this screen time. And we also know that being constantly remote is draining. So if we can shift from spending energy on just being visibly there all the time to the work, I think that would be helpful.
There are two dynamics that have happened in the GVDS that I'd like to bring out here. One is one of the things that seemed to work really well, and Lee, I think you touched upon this, is that before you even get started, having like this real deep dive into like the problem, having some involved discussion about what the purpose is and what people believe about or think that they're there for, the why behind why everyone's getting together and what the outcome is. And it doesn't necessarily have to go through an activity-based kind of discovery notion. Sometimes it's just good to have like a couple of hours where everyone kind of understands that they can eat while they're on camera, or they can just basically be audio only. But they cover like certain topics, and there's, as long as the facilitator caps like the spin-offs, then you kind of covered like the basics around all the different things you need to know so that you feel mentally ready to kind of take something on. And that the onus about understanding the problem space is more on the practitioner to basically take some time to kind of search out what they want to understand about things and then share back with the group. But there seems to be this like connection at the very beginning that seems to make sense. And it's different for every team and how things go. And then the other thing is that you may not have truly asynchronous with this, but for certain people that absolutely need to get together, like a designer or developer, or a designer and someone like copy, to basically like work through something that would take longer if you were just doing chat. You could do videos and exchange them back and forth, but if they really want to go on WhatsApp and just talk it out and they both have time, then there's still that option of basically going that route. But it's not needed all the time, it's just circumstantial. But for the most part, you can leave those, you can still work the temperance is still that you can still do video and explain your point of view when doing something or doing a particular activity. But for things that are more like that need that quick kind of feedback or quick kind of like iterative loop of understanding, you could go that route. I mean, what do you think of that?
One thing I want to mention real quick is it'll be really interesting to have the most human moments during the arc of experience during the sprint that are most difficult, right? If we know at the beginning, or people are wondering, why am I here? What are we doing? I feel lost and adrift. Maybe you have a moment there, and you could maybe have those most human moments where you're meeting together face-to-face or virtual face-to-face then and there. That may be interesting.
So we got a couple of questions. By the way, so for the last 15 minutes of our session, if you want to pepper the chat with different questions or comments, I go back on those outside of me asking the panel. You can use the Q&A, you can use YouTube if you'd like, if you're already tuned to that. I'll kind of cycle through some of these. Sabrina Gorge out in Stuttgart, Germany. She says, I have the feeling that this is a great start for transforming a team to agile work in the sense of creating autonomous teams with team dynamics. Susanna Childers wrote an involved comment for you. So I figured you can like see that on your own time rather than dictating it. But it's interesting about creating problem solving. And then Andy Davis wrote about when having offline conversations, what tactics do you use to ensure that the rest of the team has the same info and context going forward?
So as far as the info and context, I mean, part of this I think is the tool. One of the tools that we experimented with, and I think we rushed into it because not many people really got to use it, but it was Yak, and it was a voice messaging platform. And as you were kind of saying before, like those quick, intimate moments with each other, if there's more contextual work that a designer needs to do with a copywriter or something, you can send those messages back and forth where the messages are exchanged quickly, but you can also do it kind of in a team chat where maybe the people who are involved in doing the work at that moment can go back and forth on it, but the rest of the team can kind of catch up and just listen through the history of messages so they have the additional context. I mean, I'm not sure if that's answering Andy's question directly, but at least that's how I interpret it.
Yeah, and I think also one of the goals is to kind of push through some of the headwinds of difficulty with doing work, right? How can you make it frictionless to interact? And typing out a message, doing it the long way, contemplating your thoughts, and maybe getting distracted, doing other things, coming back, takes longer than maybe hitting a record button and just saying what's on your mind and shooting it back. Also, it's more information rich if it's video. So we're looking at all those ways of nipping at inefficiency throughout the process. That's another component.
It could be also speak to team norms too. So you have particular things that you just expect everyone to kind of align on right from the very beginning, and there could be some debate on what works and what doesn't with individuals. But if you set the stage as a facilitator for what you expect in terms of like that exchange of information, understanding what to do if you don't understand, if you're at a stopping point, what are some of the conventions within the asynchronous construct that you can use to basically, to let everyone know that you're either lost or you're not up to speed or you need help. Then you can go what you're talking about, Lee, in that you can do that engagement model that seems to make sense and use the tools that you have available.
Yeah, I think a project charter would be really useful up front. You want everyone involved in selecting the technology, the tools, the process to some degree. I think that's really important to do that up front, and then you can refine it towards people's needs. And then, by the way, I think it's also useful to do maybe some lightning retros at the end of sessions, and you could moderate what tools you're using or how long you're doing. Like, how did it go? Did that work right? You know, so you can get some information as it comes, as opposed to finding out all the bad stuff after the event is over. So I think getting that right, lightning retros would be an interesting thing to insert there.
Your counterpart in Experiences of Insight, David Magdaleno, he wrote a note saying, do you see asynchronous sprints being the next enhancement to the GBDS for the reasons discussed around optimization? I see this way of work ideal for most of my clients with distributed teams. He says he loves the insight and thoughts from Matt and Lee. The answer is yes. It's pretty much going to be part of the mix. And when it comes to 5 is going to be, there's going to be a couple of things that will be introduced based on the learnings of 4. But I think asynchronous is something that the nature of this event has always been, we're going to try to expand upon what's currently there and see where it goes. So I think I've already communicated to Lee and Matt that, yeah, let's just see how this rides and how the experiment goes between now and say October, and what makes sense to kind of engage people on. And that will be in that upper tier of experimental, but it's for people that are experienced in this that want to kind of saddle up and ride. I guess maybe that's the next question for both of you is what are the next steps for both of you? I mean, Sandy, you were part of their original foray into this. Maybe it's a question for all 3 of you. Where do you see the next steps? What do you see is happening in the next month or so with this effort, and where do you want to take it?
Sandy, you want to go first?
Yeah, because Matt and Lee is dominating the conversation. Sandy, why don't you just take the last 10 minutes and just explain everything that's on your mind?
Well, the last 10 minutes is mine. Wow, okay. Well, I mean, as a participant, I actually quite enjoyed it. I just see a lot of potential of it, but I see, of course, there are some things that still need to figure out. It was just the first experiment that we had, so it's quite obvious that it would have happened that way. But I see a lot of potential. One of them is that I actually found myself having more time even I was in this design sprint, because I was able to work at the time that I was more productive and I was actually free in a way. So, and the other is also I see a big potential for the facilitator if they are able to engineer and able to facilitate this, and then they can actually facilitate multiple sprints at the same time. Because like in our case, it was not really a facilitator in our team in a sense. It was Matt trying to coordinate the whole thing. I don't even know if I would call him a facilitator actually.
Nope.
No. He wasn't really doing much facilitation, right? Like it was just telling us, oh, this is the assignment. You guys have to deal with it, right? But even if there was a facilitator, I felt like at the same time, this person can actually handle multiple groups, because a lot of the things that we will be doing will be just kind of like copy paste, right? You know, instead of doing everything online, then yeah.
Yeah, for me going forward, I mean, I have kind of, based on all the feedback that we got, there are things that I know can be improved. Like going into it, we knew that there were some things that we'd hear for feedback, which we did. So for me, the next step is to really kind of gather all those thoughts, see how they would be moving forward. And I think Lee is thinking, you know, with the VR, like a little bit more high level, futuristic. So it's kind of getting my vision, getting his vision, and then figuring out how to make that into a tangible thing for GBDS 5. But again, Lee, please speak.
Yeah, so I think our first goal was to open ourselves up to criticism. If you want to learn stuff, do something that's a little provocative. I think we did that. We wanted to learn fast. And it was in flight. We were doing our work and we thought, well, this is a good idea, let's do it. As opposed to let's wait, maybe the time will be right later. And I think acting courageously, being in the moment, bias towards action, we try to do those things, we try to live those things. And that's why this was kind of as Matt said, we were boarding the plane and it was only half built. So we expect to have a fully functioning, or at least largely functioning airplane for the next one. We want to learn enough that will allow us to be better as we go forward. And I see the time between now and GBDS 5 as starting to figure out what do we need on the team, and being very deliberate about that, as opposed to let's see who shows up and let's go with that. What happens if we're deliberate with who we have on the team? How do we put recs out there for it? Maybe starting to advertise in the channel. We're looking for these types of people with this types of skill sets, and really building this Manhattan project of what is possible, doing things that are absolutely outrageous, because a percentage of those will work and they will yield great gains. I would say we're going to be doing the framing for that over the next month or so.
Okay. So it's going to be interesting to watch this space and see where things progress. I mean, I as a person that's very much in organizing logistics, I could literally see like a big board of things that are moving slowly, but basically you're just tracking like how things are going from a very high level point of view. You could literally have 20 asynchronous sprints going on at the same time. And then it's just a matter of figuring out where your engagement is and what you're responsible for. In fact, it reminds me of Razorfish. Razorfish had this huge agency board that they normally used back in like the late 1990s. And they would have, people would create these in Visio or in some other program, but essentially it would show like their availability and then what they're doing for each of the clients. And it was all in bars, percentages, and everything else. I'm sure that still exists today, but just replace that notion with asynchronous sprints in terms of like people that are getting involved with different things that appeal to them. You talk about domestic violence, Black Lives Matter, like suffrage in different countries, like available food. You do really socially impactful ideas. You don't really necessarily have a notion of where it's going to go, but you start with the notion that there needs to be some kind of work done in that space, and either latch on to what's there or start something new. But if you start it, the conversation, and have that anchor of people getting together and discussing their points of view, and if there's a synergy of thought around where it could go, this asynchronous design sprint could be very friendly to people that like it's been stated in the chat, that there's language barriers, there's geographical barriers, there's even technical barriers in terms of people being able to connect online and the internet for people who don't have that concept. It makes it easier for all those people to contribute in a meaningful way. And then all you're really doing is just setting a general timeline. It's like, we're going to give this thing about 3 weeks. Then we should probably be at these particular points in these weeks. And here are the tools you can use to communicate. And then the engagement model that you were talking about, there's certain tools that you can use for certain things. And this is when to use them. So it's a learning thing. But at the end of that 3 weeks, the idea is that someone who's a representative of the team or a couple can do like we do in the GVDS with a showcase, and make it a public forum, bring it up, present it to a group or online, and say like, this is what we've done and this is where we think is really appealing, and this is where we like to take things as a next step.
Yeah, I love it. I think you said it very well. It increases the access to when people are available, to what tools they like to use, to their energy level, the timeline. You can do multiple things at once. We all got excited when we started thinking about parallel prototyping, where you could have multiple prototypers working on a project at the same time, and then you would have the time to produce. Well, maybe we can have multiple sprints going on concurrently. And also, it's been a lot of discussion out there, I think initiated from Tom Chi and other people that are into prototyping thinking, that really we need to be thinking about rate goals as opposed to one precious prototype. And rate goals is basically how many prototypes can you build and how quickly? Because we all think we're smarter than the market, but the market is actually the only opinion that matters. And the more you can get things out in front of the market, the better. So if we have rate goals to produce 10 prototypes within a week, as opposed to one high quality prototype where maybe we fetched a little too long and then find out we were failures, it's better to run cheap experiments. And I think this helps us do that faster and to have multiple experiments going at the same time.
What if GVDS 5 had a component of it, like Sandy had designed the dark mode of the templates? What if we had a dark mode of the GVDS where it was all asynchronous sprints? And that essentially you start in October.
I was thinking exactly the same thing.
See? I knew it. I didn't even think of that, because it's like your brain thinks in design and ideas all the time, but you just don't say it. It's like eventually I'm going to hit on one. So From October 5th to November 5th, you start with an idea way in advance about how asynchronous sprints work. You basically communicate the framework, what the norms are, what the tools you would use. You would set like kind of like the pace. You would even have artifacts like we do with the regular GVDS, but they're strictly for asynchronous sprints. And you give a kind of like a general blueprint of how to do them. And then it's up to the team when they get together before the GVDS to say, okay, the first day starts October 5th. You work at a pace that makes sense for you. You basically work in an asynchronous mode. There's certain gates you should probably get to so that you aren't doing a ton of work at the very end and you break the asynchronous model. But it would be a nice experiment to see it running in parallel with the normal mode of people like in the tier 1 learning about design sprints and just wanting to do the motions. Then the medium tier, where they have some experience where they want to do more. And then the top tier, which is people that know their stuff and are really there to kind of either like promote who they are and what they do. I think asynchronous would be this like nice little underground like event where it's like people can still contribute on their own time and really see the results of both and say like, well, now that we've done it, we made the case that is a possibility for this type of work, these type of audiences, and just see where it lands.
I'm up for a subculture of async work.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, that was, who was it? Talking to Ken Soto yesterday, that was one thing he mentioned. Like, he said if he could do, once we have this figured out more, he could do another sprint team, during a week and then pop in and do asynchronous work and then, go back to it. It would be a lot easier than having to dedicate 1 week to one team.
Yep. And then that's what's perfect about that is that asynchronous lends itself to social media very well. You could basically post up what you do. If you feel like sharing, it's like, here's my work so far. And it's a real promotion. It's a real good promotion for the practitioner in terms of what they do. So you're contributing to the team as well as here's my status. Like on Twitter, you can just say, here's where I am with my work now. Here's how it's evolved. And you start that story in the narrative offline, but you share it with your audiences to say like, this is what I'm all about. So Sandy Lamb could just say, here's my evolution of, she's done that several times with the time lapse of how she explains how she does his design. It's fantastic. So just project that out into what different people do with copy or development and have people exercise those muscles around, showcasing what people can do best.
Yeah, I mean, I think there'll be some sort of balance in some way. I don't know the answer, but as Lee was talking about, right, there's some component of the makeup of the team and who is good at what, but on the other end of the spectrum, it's almost like you're doing a crowdsourcing type of thing where it is more open. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but that's something we can obviously look into and explore.
And Kapil wrote a comment around like the grandmasters playing chess with dozen players at the same time. It has that parallel. Also, Andy Davis wrote, people participating in multiple async sprints might see complementary views and activities that could drive creativity and further inspiration. So there's that. I agree with Andy in that regard. Sandy, you have the last word. We're at time. So anything else you'd like to ask Lee or Matt, or any other thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
I would like to know, like, if we can do a training on this, actually. I think it would be really cool.
I mean, I think part of it is me and Lee learning ourselves as we go through this. So maybe once we have a better idea of how we'll do this, we could do a training. But yeah, I think it's
iteration, or perhaps in GVDS5, you can actually just say, hey, this is going to be asynchronous, and then we let different people figure out their own way of doing it. And then we will see different versions, different results, and then we can get all this data at the same time. Just an idea.
Yeah, DIY async.
Yeah.
So the learning becomes asynchronous at the same time the event is asynchronous. Because then that's something that could also happen in the GVDS. I mean, that was the plan for GVDS 4, but it never transpired because I ran out of time. So we have a learning board. We have like the artifacts. Who's to say that we couldn't necessarily do the same kind of construct for asynchronous sprints and do the exact same thing?
Mm-hmm.
It's an idea, but I think you two basically have to kind of have a conversation about it. My consultant, oh, this is for me. Thank you. Well, we're at time. I have my consultant here is ready to understand where he needs to do screens. So we gotta end the session. Okay, so Lee and Matt, thank you very much for joining the session. It was wonderful having a conversation with you. It sounds like we're making plans to do more later on. And Sandy, as always, you're the reason why I'm doing this in the first place. So part of the reason. I won't put it all on you, but I'm really glad we're doing this together. So this is Remotely Interesting. Hope you tune in next Thursday. Thank you everyone who joined in on Zoom as well in YouTube to have a conversation with both Lee and Matt about asynchronous design sprints. For myself and for Sandy and for my peanut butter and jelly eating consultant here that's nudging me to basically play with them. I hope you all have a good rest of the week and a good weekend, and take care of yourself, wash your hands, social distancing, and I'm gonna take care of you in a second. All right. Bye everybody. See you later.
All right,
Oh, really? All right, here we
Thank
go.
you.
Here, look at the camera.